everyone. In this video, I would like to speak on something that we have been speaking about very consistently on this channel, and that is the issue concerning Taiwan. And I meant to get to this a while ago, but I reckon better late than never. And in doing so, I want to show you how strong the ideology here is and how it carries on in both parties as basically everything does. Need I remind you that we seem to exist within this two-party dominated political system, which on its face, two parties, it will never be enough to serve a population like what we have here. But it's really one party because they think the same and they are for the same policies. And if you notice that nothing really changes whenever either party gets elected, things only get worse, and that's a common trend that you see every election cycle. And the same can be said of the issue with Taiwan. The same can be said with the issue on Ukraine. Basically, every single foreign policy issue, they like to posture and pretend like they disagree on certain things, but it's all the same. They all serve the purpose of being figureheads. Obviously, they're extremely corrupt, and they're trying to preserve American dominance and hegemony. But what I want to do here is I want to focus on the issue of Taiwan, and we're going to do so through Mr. Michael McCall. He is a representative out of Texas. And this ideology here, what he's going to say here and elucidate for you, this basically represents the entirety of Washington and basically all of their Western allies. So just take a look at this. First is going to be an interview of him on CNN, basically telling you why it's worth it to go to war with China and spark World War III over little old Taiwan. And then in the second video, he's going to be telling you, how they're going about the self-defense and the deterrence and keeping the peace. Take a look.
Make the basic case for why Americans not only should care about what happens in Taiwan, but should be willing to spill American blood and treasure to defend Taiwan.
Nobody wants that. I think the deterrence is key here. We traveled to Japan, South Korea. We are in Guam. We're meeting with our allies, our partners here, if you will. They don't have a NATO in the Pacific, but they do have partners. We want to make sure that they are ready and supportive of the United States and Taiwan. The case for Taiwan, that's a very good question. About 50% of international trade goes through the international straits, but I think more importantly, Chuck, is that the TSMC manufactures 90% of the advanced global supply of advanced semiconductor chips. If China invades and either owns or breaks this, we're in a world of hurt, globally.
Congressman, it almost sounds like the case that would be made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s of why America was spending so much money and military resources in the Middle East. Oil was so important for the economy. Is this sort of the 21st century version of that?
I personally, I think it's about democracy and freedom. I signed off on 22 weapon systems, Maria, 3 years ago, some as long as 5 years ago, that have yet to go into Taiwan. They've actually paid for these weapons. So when I meet with President Tsai, her first question is, when am I going to get my weapons? And why is that important? Because the weapons provide the deterrence. The deterrence promotes peace and stops conflict. If we have no deterrence, just like Ukraine, if we have no deterrence on the ground in Taiwan, rest assured, Chairman Xi will make that calculation. If he can't influence the next Taiwanese presidential election, he will go to Plan B and either do a blockade or a military invasion of the island. So deterrence is absolutely critical.
Incredible. So if you couldn't gather this from those two different clips, this man, just like the rest of them, is incredibly warped and deranged. But he represents something bigger than him. I don't want you to think he's the problem. There's a bigger problem. We have a system that allows for these sorts of things to occur. So let's go through a little bit of what he said because it was striking. Why is it worth it for Americans to care about what's going on in Taiwan, or for them to be okay with letting other Americans, American soldiers specifically, die trying to do whatever the U.S. is trying to accomplish in Taiwan? And the representative responds in saying, well, we don't want anything to happen as far as soldiers losing their lives. Well, I have news for you. Him, much like everyone else, does not care if your fellow Americans who just so happen to serve lose their lives. To them, their lives are expendable. They will pretend like they care when the cameras are on, but believe me, in order to enact their goals and realize things that they would want to happen, they're completely fine with Americans going away and dying in places far away while their families are here back home wondering when they will indeed return. We've seen it before with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with Vietnam. They will surely do it again with Taiwan. And so he says this and he gives the real reason as to why, what this is for. He spills the beans on the semiconductor chips, the advanced semiconductor chips, in which the vast majority of them are produced over there in that part of the world. And then the interviewer responds by saying, well, this sounds like a lot of what, went down and, to justify going into, in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And he goes, oh, no, 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 no. It's about freedom and democracy. Whenever they are caught in between a rock and a hard place, they always fall back on the freedom and democracy. Does it sound familiar? It should, because we're getting hit with it right now as it pertains to the situation in Ukraine. What are they telling us this is for? This is to uphold freedom and democracy. That's what this is for. Putin is a killer, and we must stop him.
Yeah, he's a killer, though. Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done, too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different than...
A lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So a lot of killers around, believe me.
Let's talk about...
If you've never seen that clip before, that's probably the truest thing any American president has ever said. But I digress. Anyway, that's the same line of thinking that they're going with in Ukraine. We're doing this for freedom and democracy, when really it's to sap out your natural resources and or to preserve American authority, which is slipping, and hegemony, which is slipping, and trying to prevent a new multipolar world from emerging. And to, as we wrap this up, to address that second clip that I had slid in there about the deterrence, you can't help but wonder, and I think about this a lot, if, Russia or China or Iran or whoever else were to just station missiles in bases, military bases in places like Canada, Mexico, wherever the fuck, the U.S., first of all, they wouldn't allow it. I mean, any idea to do something like that, the U.S. would go to war. Immediately send the ships, the planes, the aircraft. So they lose their minds. Just drop the nukes. That's what time it would be if they were to do something like that. But they've surrounded. I just look it up. This is readily available information for you on Google, where NATO and by effect the U.S. has stationed military bases and where they've placed missile systems that they pointed at Russia as they surround them, which basically brought this entire conflict over in that section of Europe to fruition as it pertains to the Ukraine and the Russia situation. Just think about that for a second. And they have encircled Russia, and they're trying to do the same thing with encircling China with the Taiwan. But he says here that all of that is for defense and it's for deterrence. I fail to understand how that is for defense or deterrence when it is actually quite literally the opposite. But this is way too much for our ridiculous leaders to ponder upon and try to figure out themselves. But needless to say, we're on a very dangerous path with all of this.